Welcome back in. Kyle Clark alongside 9 News senior politics producer Mallory Harris, walking you through primary night election results in Colorado. And they dropped fast. I mean, kudos to the elections workers this year, especially in Denver, who got those things out the door in record time. We saw a drop at like 7:03, and that's why we know the Democratic Socialist Melat Kiros is poised to unseat 29-year incumbent Democrat Diana Degette. She is up 2 percentage points in the early voting, roughly 100,000 votes, just shy of that in now. We expect the total universe of votes to be somewhere around 150,000, which would be high turnout for Denver. But again, you got a race for governor. You've got this race as well. People are highly motivated. But the Degette folks thought that their best chance to win tonight is if she had a lead in those early votes. Those voters tend to be older. They've turned in their ballots earlier in the process. That was her core constituency. And the thought was that as the night went on, the returns would only get better for Kiros. So the fact that she is leading out of the gate, ho baby. All the folks nationally that were watching this race to see if the wins for Democratic Socialists that we saw in New York City might extend to Colorado and Denver. At this point, it looks like it might actually happen. Our Phil Lipoff is at the Degette watch party tonight. And Phil, Diana Degette went from one of the safest incumbents in America to sounding the alarm bells that her political career was in mortal danger. And now tonight, what's the feel?
Yeah, and Kyle, you pointed out earlier that she almost didn't even get on the ballot. Maybe that was an organization issue. The Kiros campaign was really aggressive too. But here we are now as the race has narrowed and we have this first ballot drop, and the Degette campaign wanted to do a lot better than the numbers that we are looking at right now. I was listening to Spencer talk. I was watching his live shot from the Kiros campaign, and there were a lot of people there. And you know, Spencer said he'd be hard pressed to find someone over 30 or 40. Here at the Degette campaign, you'd be hard pressed to find someone under. It's just that's the demographic of the campaign. But let me show you this room. We're at a winery here in Denver, and in this room that we're in, there are about 15 or 20 people, and that includes members of the media and a bartender. There's also a patio where there are about another 15 or 20 people. So we don't even have 40 to 50 people here in this room. I asked to speak to the campaign manager. I was told campaign manager is not here. The candidate's not here. We haven't seen any other candidates here, any other politicians who might be supporting her. Kyle, you mentioned those other up-and-coming Democrats who were sort of chomping at the bit to get a hold of this seat, or at least an open primary if Degette had decided not to run. That is not the case. They are now probably frustrated, not happy, and looking to 2 years down the road. Now, we don't know what's going to happen, but as you and Mallory point out, that first ballot drop was really important because younger, more progressive voters vote later in the night, so Degette needed to show really well in this first ballot drop. 30 years ago, Diana Degette was elected to Congress after Pat Schroeder had retired. At the time, Degette was the younger, more progressive candidate who took the torch. If that sounds familiar, it's because 30 years later, Melat Kiros is the younger, more progressive candidate looking to take that torch, and it looks like she is having a pretty good showing so far tonight. And if this is any indication of how the Degette campaign feels, it's kind of quiet here. Kyle?
Right? I mean, how do 3-decade-long political careers end? Not with a bang, but what a whimper. And that's a bit of a whimper of a party that Phil Lipoff is at tonight. Phil, thank you. We're now getting a bit of a clearer picture in the race for governor, as we now have more than 300,000 votes tallied. If we could take a look at the results first on this, we were saying pump the brakes when we were 100,000 votes in. And now we're approaching 400,000 votes in, which could be about 40% of the expected electorate. And that is an astonishing 12-point lead for Phil Weiser. Again, a situation where Michael Bennett's path to victory was to come out strong in early results and hold on to a lead. Phil Weiser's team prepared to chip away at a margin throughout the evening for much the same reason that we've talked about the Degette Kiros race having that same dynamic about older voters, sometimes more centrist voters voting first in Democratic primaries. A 12 percentage point lead for Phil Weiser.
This is not as clear a progressive versus establishment incumbent situation as maybe the Kiros and Degette campaign is, or some of the other statewide campaigns. But Weiser, again, Michael Bennet is one of the more establishment candidates in Colorado. It's hard to imagine, even though he's running for a new seat, that some people are not viewing him just as an extension of Senate Michael Bennet, an establishment candidate, and that potentially is playing in big for Phil Weiser here.
Yeah, so the Weiser folks knew that they were going to have to run up the score in a couple of places, right? This happens in every campaign. Where does your campaign have to be strong? Where can you take a little bit of a loss, right? They knew that they were going to have to be strong in the Denver metro area and in Boulder. Looking at the breakdown of results for just Denver in the gubernatorial primary on the Democrat side, Phil Weiser leads Michael Bennet by 30 percentage points. Again, that's not what you're seeing here because these are statewide numbers. But if you look at Denver only, Denver, you've got Phil Weiser up 65-35 over Michael Bennet, that's a stomping is what that is. So Michael Bennet is going to need to make up ground in other parts of the state. And again, we're going to continue to dig into where these statewide numbers are coming from. But let's get out to our Jennifer Meckles, who is with the Weiser campaign tonight. And they certainly have to like what they see.
Yeah, and it's kind of wild. It's very meta when we're in these kind of positions, Kyle, because you and Mallory were just on the board behind me talking about those numbers, and the room started cheering. So I guess you're a popular guy right now for delivering that message. I've been kind of moving around the room, just talking to people, trying to get a feel for how everyone's feeling right now. Nobody here is like losing their mind, but they're all very measured, optimistic so far. I've been trying to get a sense of who is in this room tonight. If we talk so much about Bennet appointing potentially this next senator, so who would be in his room compared to who is in this room, and who are the electeds in this room? And it's not a room full of a bunch of active electeds. There's a few here. I see. I walked around there myself. Former Governor Roy Romer, State Rep Brianna Titone. This is the strangest thing. They're cheering me. I think they are generally excited to be on TV and generally excited to have good news to talk about tonight with you guys. All right, there you go. There's the flavor of the room at Weiser's party tonight. Feeling pretty confident. I talked to somebody in the room who I said, what has made a difference in the last year with this race? What has made this race more competitive? And a lot of people here are telling me that they actually think that some of the turnout, at least in the Denver area for Kiros, may be benefiting Weiser, which is an interesting Venn diagram of voters tonight, but that may have had some more people come out to vote for Weiser, Kyle. It's hard to stay focused when they're screaming at the same time I'm talking to you.
Yeah, no, don't let the kids tell you that being on TV isn't cool anymore. Everybody in that room certainly thought that it was pretty exciting. Jennifer Meckles reporting from the Weiser Watch Party tonight. If we can bring up the statewide numbers again, just because, again, this would be a real surprise if Phil Weiser absolutely runs away with it. Because the thing that you have to remember is that Michael Bennet came into this race a year ago as the overwhelming favorite. We knew that he was going to be well-financed. He's a sitting senator. He's been in office in Colorado for decades. He has an open Senate seat, if he leaves, that he can dangle over other Colorado Republicans to keep them in line behind him. In fact, the rest of the congressional delegation got behind him in his race for governor. He had the Democratic establishment, for the most part, behind him, even though Phil Weiser is part of that establishment, right? These guys are not enemies, right? They have been political allies for a long time. They've just ended up in this race against each other. And the thought for a long time was that Bennet was going to dispatch Weiser pretty easily. There was a poll that Bennet-aligned folks put out back in February that had him up more than 20 points. And then you saw signs that the race was closing, that it was closing, that it was closing. And it was clear that the momentum was with Weiser based on the behavior of the Bennet camp. Colorado is not a richly polled state anymore, to the extent that you can poll people accurately anymore. So a lot of times you have to go off the behavior of the candidates, which is different than vibes, but it's vibe adjacent. You go off the behavior of the candidates, and Michael Bennet started to act like a candidate who was in a fight for his political life. He went negative on Weiser, he went hard negative on Weiser, and he began to blanket the airwaves with advertising, which said that Weiser had closed this race. Weiser's team put out a poll a couple of weeks ago, or somebody fairly adjacent to the team, rather, that showed him within the margin of error. Needless to say, if they had a poll that showed him up, they would have put out the poll that showed him up, but they had a poll that showed him competitive. But what you saw there was that trend line, right? Weiser trend line, whoosh, to the moon, okay? And then the question was, how soon could this race be over for Michael Bennet? If those results hold tonight, the answer is not soon enough. If the primary was in March, Michael Bennet probably would have done just fine. Tonight, just fine is not a word that anybody on his team would use to describe those early results. We have the race calls in two races that were not expected to be competitive. In the race for Colorado Attorney General, Democratic primary, as expected, Jena Griswold easily tops a four-way field. The interesting thing to watch here, Mallory, was would she top 50%?
Yeah, you're looking at those returns. She's at 46% right now. We've said all along that there are some very qualified candidates in this race. You're looking at three extremely qualified challengers to Griswold, and with 20%, 17%, 16%. You have to think if they coalesced around one candidate that would give more of a challenge to Griswold, but it seems like they're going to split the anti-Griswold vote and send her to the Attorney General's office. Yeah,
and one thing that we had talked about throughout this race, right? Jena Griswold has tremendous name ID among Democratic voters. She is one of the most, this is going to sound pejorative, I don't mean to be pejorative, she's one of the most relentless self-promoters you'll ever meet in politics, in the sense that she's constantly advocating for herself to be at the front of everything, right?
She's a fundraising machine.
Machine as a result of that, right? She is known nationally for her appearances on CNN and MSNBC and her appetite for taking on Donald Trump. And it's made her a very formidable candidate in Democratic Party politics, even though her time as Secretary of State was marred by missteps and accountability issues and so forth. You put somebody in a four-way field and they're a fundraising powerhouse and Coloradans know them, that person's going to be very, very tough to beat. And in fact, Jena Griswold, impossible to beat tonight, as none of her challengers were able to break away from the pack. We have results in the Democratic race for Secretary of State. Again, we're focusing on the Democratic primaries because Republicans have not been competitive statewide in Colorado in a decade. And this race looks like it is handily going to Amanda Gonzalez, who is the Jeffco elections clerk and recorder. She's run elections in Jeffco over Jesse Danielson, who's a state legislator, also from Jeffco. This is a race too small to poll, so we didn't know where this was going to be. Not competitive. Gonzalez thought to be the more progressive candidate in this race.